They kicked me out of my own house. My own son stood there, his arms crossed, looking me right in the eye and said, "Dad, we talked it over. You can't stay here anymore." And before I could even ask why, his wife was already moving her parents in. The same day. My son threw me out and moved his in-laws right into my living room. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the house was still in my name. That afternoon, while they were busy unpacking, I was sitting quietly in a lawyer's office, signing the papers to sell the house. Funny how life goes. Name's Walter Hayes. Born and raised just outside Wichita, Kansas. Worked 32 years as a long-haul truck driver. Drove through every state but Hawaii. I was never the rich type, never even thought about owning much. But that house was my wife's dream. Martha picked out the curtains, the color on the kitchen walls, even that old rocking chair on the porch. We built our life there, raised our son there, and after she passed, I figured, well, at least I've still got the house. I thought it'd be a place my family would always be welcome. Turns out I was wrong. Stay with me till the end. And if this story reminds you of anything, maybe someone in your family or a neighbor who's been through it, leave a comment. Let me know where you're watching from. I'd sure like to hear your story too. Now, let me tell you exactly how it all happened. It was the first week of April. I remember because the weather was just starting to warm up again. I was out on the porch early that morning, sipping my coffee, same as always. Wore my old denim jacket, the one Martha used to patch up for me. Then my son pulls up. Didn't even call first. He gets out of the car, walks up, and he's not smiling. I knew right then, this wasn't a friendly visit. He sits down, looks at me like he's about to deliver some kind of official notice. "Dad," he says, "we've been talking." Now when someone starts like that, you already know no good news is coming. I set my coffee down. I asked, "Talking about what?" That's when he dropped it. Said they needed more space. Said his in-laws were getting older, needed care. Said it was time for me to move on. Move on. From my own home. I didn't even answer at first. Just stared down at the porch floorboards, the same ones I had sanded and painted myself 15 years ago. He kept talking. "We'll help you find a nice place, Dad. Somewhere quieter. Maybe one of those senior homes." I wasn't angry. Not yet. It felt more like a punch to the gut than anything else. But what really hit me wasn't even his words. It was the way he looked past me, like I was already gone. By noon, I was packing up, quietly. No shouting, no begging. I grabbed my duffel bag, the same one I'd carried back in '73 when I came home from Vietnam. Tossed in a few shirts, my shaving kit, the photo of Martha in her wedding dress. And as I stepped out onto that porch one last time, I saw them, his wife, her parents, smiling, bringing in boxes. It was like I'd been erased. But here's where things take a turn. Because what my son forgot, or maybe never cared to learn, was that years ago, after Martha passed, I made sure the deed stayed in my name. No joint ownership, no transfer, just me. I let them live there all these years, thinking it was already theirs. But it wasn't. So I walked down the street, found myself a cab, and headed straight to my lawyer. I remember sitting there, leather chairs squeaking under me, while Mr. Reynolds looked over the papers. "You sure about this, Walter?" he asked. I didn't even blink. "Sell it," I said. "Sell it today." I signed the papers with a hand that didn't shake, and as I walked out of that office, sun on my face, bag on my shoulder, I felt lighter than I had in years. And that's how it started. But trust me, things weren't finished yet. Because what happened next, even I couldn't have seen it coming. I remember the sound my boots made on that cracked sidewalk as I walked away from the lawyer's office. Slow, steady, just like I'd done a million times before in my life. But that day, there was something different in my chest. Not anger, not exactly sadness either. It was more like a kind of hollow quiet. The kind a man feels when he knows he's done something that needed doing, even if it wasn't easy. I didn't look back. Not once. Not at the house, not at my son's car, not at those windows where I'd spent years sitting with Martha, watching the sun go down. I just kept walking. Most folks might think it's strange, selling the house where your whole life happened. And maybe they'd be right. But after the way my own blood treated me that morning, it didn't feel like home anymore. That house had been my wife's dream, sure. But dreams change. People change. And standing there on that sidewalk, I realized, sometimes letting go is the only way to hold on to what really matters, your own dignity. The cab dropped me off by the old diner on Main Street, corner of Maple and 3rd. Used to come here with Martha on Sunday mornings after church. Same cracked vinyl booths, same smell of burnt coffee and bacon grease. I pushed through the door and heard the little bell ring up top, same as always, and there she was, Jean. Same waitress, bless her heart. Must have been working there since the 80s. She looked up, eyes wide like she'd seen a ghost. "Walter Hayes," she said, setting down a coffee pot. "Ain't seen you in a while?" I just smiled, took my usual spot by the window. Figured today was a good day for pancakes. We didn't say much after that. She poured me a cup, black, no sugar. And as I sat there, hands wrapped around that warm mug, I let myself breathe, really breathe. It was like all those years of carrying everyone else's weight had finally lifted. My son, my daughter-in-law, her folks, they could have the furniture, the curtains, whatever they wanted. But the house was mine to give away. Or not. Now you might wonder why I didn't call him right then and there. Tell him what I'd done. But that's not how I was raised. Back in my day, a man let his actions speak louder than his words. So I sat there quiet, looking out that window, watching the trucks go by, and let the clock tick. By late afternoon, I'd already made a few more calls. Set up a temporary room at the old motel just outside town. Simple place. 1 bed, small fridge, TV that barely worked. But it was enough. That's all I needed. I wasn't looking for fancy. I just needed some time to think and maybe figure out what came next. Funny thing is, while I was sitting there, unpacking my duffel onto that motel dresser, I found something I hadn't thought about in years, an old key. Silver, worn down at the edges. The key to the garage door back at the house. Martha had always kept it on a little leather strap, said it was her just-in-case key. And here I was, holding it in my hand, like it meant something all over again. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lay there on that stiff motel bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow. I kept hearing my son's voice in my head. "We talked it over, Dad." Like I was some old couch they were getting rid of. And the more I thought about it, the more I wondered. How long had he been planning that? Weeks? Months? Maybe longer. The next morning, I walked back into town, not to make trouble, just to see it all one more time. I stood across the street from the house, my house, and watched as they carried in boxes, laughing, chatting like it was some holiday. My son didn't even glance out the window, and that's when it really hit me. I wasn't part of their picture anymore, but I wasn't gone yet, and I wasn't done either, because there was still one thing left to do, something I'd been holding off on for years. And looking at that house, knowing what was coming, I felt ready. What happened after that? Well, let's just say it changed everything. I wasn't sure if I should mail it or hand it over myself. That letter. A single sheet of paper that carried more weight than all the years I'd spent trying to hold my family together. But sitting there in that motel room, coffee growing cold on the nightstand, I knew it had to be done. It wasn't about revenge. Not exactly. It was about setting things right in the only way left to me. The letter wasn't fancy, no long speeches, just a simple line. By the time you read this, the house won't be yours anymore. It never was. I signed my name at the bottom, Walter Hayes, like it meant something, and to me, it did. For the first time in years, it meant I wasn't invisible anymore. I folded it once, tucked it into a plain envelope, and set it aside. That morning I went down to the diner again. Jean poured me my usual and gave me that quiet smile only folks from small towns know how to give. She must have sensed something was different because she asked, "You all right, Walter?" I just nodded. Got some things to finish up. Didn't need to say more. Around noon, I walked the 2 miles back to my old street. No cab this time. Just my boots, the sun overhead, and that letter in my jacket pocket. Funny how empty a man's hands can feel when all he's carrying is paper. When I turned onto Maple Street, there it was again. My house. Or what used to feel like mine. I stood on the sidewalk for a while, watching. The blinds were open. I could see them all in there. My son sitting at the table, his wife unpacking some kitchen things, her parents watching TV like it was just another day. Like I hadn't existed at all. I could have walked right up to the door, knocked, and made a scene. But that's not who I am. I walked up the porch steps real slow, took out the letter, and slid it right through the mail slot. It made the softest sound as it hit the floor inside. Then I stepped back, hands in my pockets, looking up at the old roof. Same shingles I'd fixed myself back in '98. Same porch light Martha used to leave on for me when I came home late from a haul. It hurt more than I expected, but it also felt finished. I didn't stick around to see their faces when they read it. That wasn't the point. I turned around, walked back down the street, and by the time I hit Main, I felt like a man stepping out of a storm. Lighter. But here's the part I didn't expect. As I crossed the diner parking lot, I heard a voice behind me. Someone calling my name. "Walter! Hey, Walter!" I turned and there he was. An old friend I hadn't seen in years. Tommy Doyle. We'd served in Nam together. Hadn't spoken in over a decade. And there he was, grinning like we'd just had coffee yesterday. "Tommy," I said. And for the first time in days, maybe weeks, I smiled too. Sometimes life throws you out of one door, just so you can walk through another. And that's where things really started to change. Tommy and I hadn't seen each other in close to 12 years, maybe longer. Yet there we were, standing in the middle of that diner parking lot like no time had passed at all. He still wore that same beat-up leather jacket from back in the day, same limp in his left leg from shrapnel we both pretended never happened. And me with my old denim and boots. Two ghosts from another life meeting again by chance. Or maybe it wasn't chance at all. "Man," Tommy said, looking me up and down. "Didn't expect to see your old face back in town. Heard you'd moved down to Tulsa or something." I shook my head, smiling a little. That same half-smile Martha used to call my quiet grin. "Never left, Tommy. Just been keeping to myself." We went inside, grabbed a booth by the window. Jean didn't even need to ask. 2 black coffees, 2 plates of eggs and bacon. Same as always. We didn't say much at first. Just sat there, sipping our coffee, watching the street outside like we had nothing but time. But inside, my mind was racing. I kept thinking about that letter sitting on the floor of my old house, wondering if they'd read it yet, wondering what my son was saying right now. Tommy finally broke the silence. "So, you want to tell me what's really going on?" I could have lied, said it was nothing. But looking at Tommy, knowing all we'd been through, there wasn't any point. "My son kicked me out," I said, voice low. "Said I wasn't needed anymore. Brought his in-laws in the same day." Tommy's face didn't change much. Just that slow, steady nod of a man who's seen worse but still feels it. "That's rough, Walt." "Sold the house," I added. "Signed it over to some real estate guy yesterday. Didn't even tell him. Just left him there, thinking it was all theirs." Tommy leaned back, let out a long breath. Damn. We sat like that for a while. 2 old men, coffee growing cold between us, letting the weight of things settle. And I realized then, I wasn't as angry as I thought I'd be. More tired than anything. Tired of being the one holding things together when nobody else seemed to care. "Funny," I said after a bit. "Spent my whole life thinking family was everything. Worked my hands raw just to make sure they'd have something when I was gone. Turns out, all it gets you is an empty room." Tommy looked me square in the eye. "Nah, it gets you peace of mind, Walt, knowing you did what was right, whether they saw it or not." That stuck with me. Still does. Later that afternoon, we walked out together. Tommy offered me a place to stay for a while. Said he had a spare room at his place out by the old mill. I told him I'd think about it. For now, the motel was enough. I needed time to breathe, to let things settle in my mind. When I got back to my room, there was a message waiting at the front desk, handwritten on a scrap of paper. "Mr. Hayes, please call regarding 212 Maple Street. Urgent." That was the house's address, and it wasn't from my son. It was from the real estate agent. My hand tightened around the note. I knew right then something wasn't going according to plan, and that's when I realized this wasn't over yet. When I picked up the motel room phone that night, my hand wasn't even shaking. You'd think after everything, being kicked out, selling my own house without telling my son, dropping that letter through the mail slot, I'd be a bundle of nerves. But I wasn't. I felt calm, steady, like a man who already knows what kind of storm is coming and just puts on his old raincoat and waits for it. I dialed the number from the note. The line rang twice, then a woman's voice picked up. Real estate office. Professional, polite, but there was a tension in her voice too, like she wasn't sure exactly how to say what she had to say. "Mr. Hayes?" she asked, her voice crisp. I said, "Yeah, that was me." Then she said it. "There's a complication with the sale of 212 Maple Street." I didn't answer right away, just listened as she kept talking. She explained it clear as day. Someone at the county office had flagged the deed. There was a mix-up with paperwork. A lien placed on the property years ago, something from back when Martha was still alive. An old medical bill, unpaid, that had attached itself to the house without me realizing. It wasn't much, only a few $1,000s, but enough to freeze the sale until it was cleared. Now most folks might have panicked, maybe gotten mad. But me? I just leaned back on that creaky motel chair, staring up at the ceiling fan spinning slow and steady, and I let out a long, low breath. I should have expected it. Life always throws one more curveball when you think you're done swinging. I thanked her for the call, hung up, and sat there in silence for a long time. Just me, the fan, and the weight of old memories pressing in like the Kansas wind against a barn door. That night I didn't sleep much. Kept thinking about Martha, about how all those little things, like an unpaid hospital bill from decades back, could follow a man around, even after she was gone. I remember the nights I spent by her bedside at St. Francis Medical, holding her hand, while the machines beeped. I thought we'd cleared everything back then, paid off what we could. But I guess not everything gets settled clean in this life. The next morning, I made my way back to the diner. Jean wasn't there that day. Just some younger gal I didn't know. Coffee wasn't as strong, but it did the job. I sat by the window again, same booth, and watched the street outside. And wouldn't you know it, about half an hour later, Tommy walked in. Like he knew I'd be there. He slid into the booth across from me, no hello this time. Just leaned in and said, "You hear about the house?" I didn't even ask how he knew. Small towns have their own kind of telegraph, always have. I nodded, sipping my coffee. Yeah, medical lien, slowing things down. Tommy scratched his chin, that old scar by his jaw catching the morning light. "That why you look like hell warmed over?" he asked, voice quiet. I just shrugged. "One more thing, that's all." We sat like that for a while, not saying much. Two men who'd seen enough life to know some days don't give you clear answers. Finally, I set my cup down and told him flat, "I'm thinking of going back there, to the house, just once." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "You sure that's a good idea?" "Not really," I said, "but there's some things a man's got to do face to face." So that afternoon, I walked back to Maple Street again. Same 2 miles, same sun overhead. But this time, it felt heavier somehow. Like every step was carrying not just my own weight, but all those years piled up behind me. Memories, regrets, things unsaid. When I turned the corner, I stopped. Right there across the street, parked in front of my house, was my son's truck. And next to it, a car I didn't recognize. Sleek, black. Didn't look like anything from around here. Probably the real estate guy. I stood there for a while, watching. And then, slow and steady, I crossed the street. I walked right up to the porch, just like I used to when Martha was waiting inside with coffee and music on the old radio. But now, it felt like a stranger's house. I knocked once. Firm. No answer. Knocked again. And after a moment, the door opened. It wasn't my son standing there. It was his wife. Her face froze the second she saw me, like she'd seen a ghost. "Walter," she whispered. I didn't say a word, just looked past her, into the living room where I'd spent so many years. The same couch, the same old clock on the mantel, and there was my son, standing there with a piece of paper in his hand. My letter, the one I'd slid through the mail slot. His face was pale, jaw tight. Like all those years of pretending to be the man of the house had just come crashing down. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since he was a boy. Why'd you do this? I could have unloaded everything right there. The hurt, the betrayal. But I didn't. I just stepped up closer, looking him dead in the eye. "Because," I said, voice steady as stone, "you forgot who built this house, who kept it standing. And you forgot that nothing in this world gets handed to you just because you think you deserve it." He didn't have an answer for that. That's when the man in the black car stepped forward. Must have been the real estate lawyer. He cleared his throat, looking nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. "Mr. Hayes, there's paperwork we still need to finalize. The lien." I raised my hand to stop him. "I know," I said. "We'll take care of it." And then, looking at my son one last time, I said, "You'll have to find someplace else to live." I turned and walked away before he could answer. My boots heavy on the porch steps, heart heavier still. But there was no turning back now. And as I hit the sidewalk again, I knew one thing for sure. This story wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. When I walked away from that house for the last time, there was no anger burning in my chest. Not even disappointment. Just quiet. A kind of silence that wraps around you when you finally let something go for good. I didn't look back. Not once. I knew my son was standing there in that doorway, holding that letter in his hand, watching me walk down those steps like it was the end of something. And maybe it was. But for me, it wasn't an ending. It was the first honest breath I'd taken in years. I made my way back to Main Street, same route as always, past the grocery store that hadn't changed in 20 years, past the barber shop where I used to get my hair trimmed once a month like clockwork. Funny thing about small towns. You walk the same streets your whole life, but it only takes one bad morning to make them feel like a whole different place. At the diner, Jean was back behind the counter. I didn't say much when I walked in. Just tipped my hat to her and slid into my usual booth. She brought me coffee without asking. Black, strong, just the way I liked it. And as I sat there, hands wrapped around that warm cup, I started thinking about all the things I'd carried with me over the years that I never said out loud. Martha used to tell me, "Walter, you keep too much inside. One day it's going to weigh you down." I guess she was right. I'd spent so long trying to be the steady one, the man who never lost his temper, never raised his voice, always kept things together. But now I realized there was one more thing I needed to do. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Not the letter I'd given my son. This one was different. Smaller, thicker paper. I'd written it the night before, after that call from the real estate office. It wasn't addressed to my son. It was for my grandson. See, my boy had 2 kids, little ones, still in school. And none of this was their fault. They didn't ask for family drama. They didn't deserve to get caught in the middle of all this. So I wrote them something simple. No bitterness. Just a story about their granddad. About the house. About how sometimes doing the right thing doesn't always look right to everybody else. I folded the envelope back into my pocket and sat there for a long time, drinking my coffee, watching the sun drop lower in the sky. And that's when Tommy came through the door again. He slid into the booth across from me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Didn't say hello this time. Just poured himself some sugar from the little packets on the table, then looked up at me, eyes sharp. "You all right, Walt?" I nodded. "Yeah, just got one more thing to take care of." Tommy didn't ask what. That's the kind of friend he was. Didn't need to know all the details to stand by a man. We sat there in silence for a while longer before I finally stood up, left a few bills on the table, and stepped back out into the evening air. The sun was almost gone by then, sky turning that deep purple Kansas kind of color. I walked to the post office. It was just past closing time, but I knew the after-hours drop box would still be open. Took that little envelope from my pocket, held it for a second, thinking about those two kids, wondering if they'd even remember me years from now. Then I slid it into the slot. Let it go. When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, I felt lighter. Like dropping that letter was the last brick off my back. But as I stood there, hands in my jacket pockets, I spotted something across the street that made me pause. My son. He was standing by his truck, engine running, headlights cutting through the dark. He must have been driving around looking for me. Our eyes met across the street, and for a long minute, neither of us moved. Then he stepped off the curb, walked toward me, slow like a man carrying something heavy inside him. I didn't speak first. Let him come all the way across. When he stopped in front of me, he didn't look angry, just tired, older than I remembered. "Dad," he said, voice low. "We need to talk." I didn't say no, just nodded. And right there, on that quiet Kansas street, with nothing but the sound of crickets and far-off engines humming in the night, we finally stood face to face. We stood there under that Kansas sky, two men facing each other like we hadn't in years. And after everything that had happened, the eviction, the house, the letter, what my son said caught me so off guard I had to blink twice just to make sure I'd heard it right. "Dad," he said, voice low, eyes on the pavement instead of me. "I didn't know the house was still in your name. I thought it had transferred when Mom passed, that it was ours already. Now I'd been through a lot in my life. Long nights on the road hauling freight across state lines, funerals, bar fights back in my younger years. But hearing that mix of assumption and ignorance, that hit a little deeper than I expected. I didn't answer right away. Just let the silence stretch between us like an old rope fraying at the ends. Finally, I said, "That's the thing, son. You never asked. You never once sat me down and said, 'Dad, what's the story with the house?' You just acted like it was already yours." He looked up at me then, really looked at me. There was something in his face I hadn't seen in a long time. Maybe not since he was a kid. Regret. Or maybe guilt. Hard to tell. "I messed up," he said quietly. "I messed up bad." That right there. That's the first honest thing I'd heard out of his mouth in longer than I could remember. I could have laid into him. Could have reminded him about how they'd brought the in-laws in the same day they'd pushed me out. But I didn't. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe I'd just lived long enough to know some things don't need to be said out loud. Instead, I just nodded once. Slow. "Yeah," I said. "You did." We stood there another minute, both of us not sure where to go from there. Then he shifted his weight from one foot to the other like he couldn't stand still. "So what now?" he asked. "The house is sold?" I nodded again. "It's in motion. There's a lien we gotta clear, but after that, yeah, it's done." He let out a long breath, like he'd been holding it in for days. "And you didn't do it just to hurt us?" That one hit different. I actually had to close my eyes for a second, steady myself. I did it because I couldn't stand in that house anymore knowing I wasn't welcome. Because I built that home for my family, not to be treated like a burden. For a moment, I thought he might say something else. Maybe apologize fully. Maybe ask me to come back. But instead, he just nodded, looking smaller than I remembered him ever being. Like a boy again instead of a grown man with a wife and kids. After a while, I turned to go. Figured that was all there was to say. But then, as I stepped off the curb, he said something that stopped me cold. "Dad, there's something I didn't tell you." I turned back, brow furrowing. "What's that?" He swallowed hard, looked up at me again and said, "Mom left something for you. Years ago, after she passed. I found it in a box in the attic a while back, but I never gave it to you. I don't know why. Guess I just forgot. Or maybe I didn't want to deal with it." That hit me harder than the eviction, harder than selling the house. My chest tightened like someone had wrapped a belt around it. "What kind of something?" I asked, voice rougher now. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Yellowed at the edges, like it had been sitting there untouched for years. My name was on it. Walter, written in Martha's handwriting. I'd know that curl on the W anywhere. He held it out to me, both hands shaking just a little. "I'm sorry," he said again, voice cracking now. "I should have given it to you a long time ago." For a second, I couldn't even move. My hands felt heavy, like they weren't part of me. Then I stepped forward, took the envelope from him, and just held it there. Couldn't bring myself to open it. Not right then. "Thank you," I managed to say. And I meant it. More than anything he'd said up until now. I didn't wait around after that. Just turned and walked back toward the motel, envelope clutched tight in my hand like it was worth more than gold. And maybe, in a way, it was. When I got back to my room, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, envelope resting on my knee, staring at it like it might disappear if I blinked. Finally, with a breath as deep as I'd ever taken, I tore it open. Inside, there was a letter, written in Martha's hand. The ink faded, but still clear. I unfolded the letter with both hands, careful like I was holding something fragile. Martha had always written in that neat, looping script, old-school cursive, the kind kids don't even learn in school anymore. My eyes ain't what they used to be, but I didn't need glasses to see her words. They hit me right in the gut before I'd even finished the first line. "Walter, if you're reading this, I'm not here anymore. And I know you. You're probably sitting somewhere quiet, cup of coffee in one hand, this letter in the other, trying not to let it show if you're crying." I had to pause right there, because she wasn't wrong. I set the letter down on my knee for a second, rubbed at my eyes, took a breath, picked it back up again. "I never wanted to leave things undone between us, and I know you always tried so hard to be strong. For me, for our boy, for everybody. But I want you to promise me something. Don't carry the weight forever. If things ever get heavy, if family lets you down, if life feels like it's pushing you out of your own house, remember, the roof and the walls don't matter as much as your own peace. That's what's worth holding on to." It felt like she'd written it just for this moment, like somehow, all those years ago, she'd known. And that's when I realized what was inside the envelope along with the letter. A small brass key, taped to the bottom of the page. I peeled it off slowly, held it in my hand. It wasn't for the house. I knew that instantly. This key was smaller, finer, like something for a lockbox or maybe a safety deposit. Martha didn't say in the letter what it was for, just that I'd know when the time came. I sat there for a long while staring at that key, thought about all the places it could belong to. Then it hit me. Back when Martha got sick, before the hospital stays and all the treatments, she'd gone down to the bank a lot. Told me she was sorting out just-in-case things. I hadn't thought much of it then. Didn't ask too many questions. I figured she was making sure the house and bills were handled if something happened. But now I realized she'd been planning for more than just bills. The next morning, I walked straight down to First Kansas Bank. Still had my old account there, even though I hadn't stepped inside in years. Same brass handles on the front door. Same marble counters. The teller was a young girl, couldn't have been older than 25. I told her my name, showed her the key, and asked if there was a box in my wife's name. She typed for a while, furrowing her brow, then nodded. "Yes, sir. There's a safety deposit box registered under Martha Hayes. Secondary access listed under Walter Hayes." My stomach tightened a little when I heard that. She brought me to the back room, opened a little steel door, and there it was. Box number 47. When I slid it open, there wasn't much inside. Just two things. The first was a small velvet pouch. Inside it, a gold locket. Martha's locket. The one she used to wear every Sunday. The one I thought had been buried with her. Inside the locket, folded up impossibly small, was a tiny black and white photo. Me and her, standing in front of the house the day we bought it. The second thing in that box was a check. A cashier's check made out in my name. For $72,500. I just sat there staring at it, mouth dry. Martha must have set it aside years ago. Money I never knew we had. After all these years. While I'd been worrying about selling the house, about liens and lawyers, about how my son had pushed me out. Martha had left me a way forward I didn't even know existed. And sitting there in that little bank room, holding that check and that locket, I felt something break loose inside me. A weight lifting I hadn't realized was still sitting there on my back. I walked out of that bank into the bright Kansas sun, feeling like a man 10 years younger. No more house tying me down. No more motel room waiting for me like some kind of punishment. For the first time in a long while, I had options. But I didn't go back to the motel right away. I found myself walking down Maple Street one more time just to see it. The old house. And that's when I saw something that stopped me cold. A moving truck, parked right out front. Boxes stacked on the porch. My son standing there, his face pale as paper, watching as strangers carried furniture out the door. They were clearing it out, fast. And for a split second, I wondered, had he already found out about the lien being cleared? Had the sale closed that quick? But something about it felt different. Something wasn't right. I stood there on the corner, watching. And then I saw him pull out his phone, pacing up and down the driveway. Something was definitely wrong. I hadn't seen the last of that house yet. I stood there on the sidewalk, the afternoon sun pressing down on my shoulders, watching my son pace up and down the driveway with his phone in one hand, his free hand rubbing the back of his neck like he did when things weren't going his way. The moving truck was still there, back doors wide open. A couple of men carrying out furniture I recognized. My old recliner, the dining room table Martha and I had picked out together back in '84, the same one we'd sat at every Thanksgiving. I watched as if I wasn't even part of it, as if I were some stranger passing through town. Except I wasn't a stranger, and that wasn't just some house to me. That was my life, packed into boxes and hauled away like it didn't mean a thing. My son didn't notice me standing there, or maybe he did and chose not to acknowledge it. Either way, I wasn't in the mood for standing around pretending like I didn't care. I crossed the street, slow and steady, boots scraping against the pavement with each step. And when I got up to the edge of the driveway, I didn't say a word. I just stood there, arms crossed, eyes fixed on him until he finally glanced over and stopped moving, phone still pressed to his ear. For a second, there was nothing. No words, just the two of us frozen in place like old trees in a windstorm, both of us too stubborn to be the first to fall. Then he lowered the phone, let out a breath and said, "Dad, it's not what you think." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready for explanations yet. I just waited, silent, while he looked down at the ground and kicked at a crack in the driveway with his boot. "We lost it," he said finally, voice low, like he hated having to say it out loud. "The sale, it didn't cover everything. Taxes, old debts, liens I didn't even know about. The bank, they're taking the house. It's foreclosure." Hearing that word hit me harder than I thought it would. Foreclosure. After all I'd done, after signing the papers, after everything Martha and I had worked for, it wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't about my son either. It was about that house. It was like watching the last piece of something I'd built with my own two hands fall apart right in front of me. I looked up at the porch, saw the empty spot where Martha's old rocker used to sit, and felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, not even sadness exactly, more like a cold kind of understanding. This was what happened when things got left unsaid too long, when families stopped talking to each other, when pride got in the way of asking for help. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I asked finally, voice low but steady. My son shook his head, eyes still on the ground. "Didn't want to bother you. Didn't want you to think I couldn't handle things." That right there. That was the heart of it. All those years of me trying to be the strong one, trying to carry everything on my back without ever letting anyone see me sweat. And he'd learned the same thing. Learned it too well. I let out a slow breath, felt the weight of it all settle in my bones. "You didn't have to handle it alone," I said, quieter now. "I would have helped. You're still my son." He didn't answer, but I could see it in his face. The regret, the weight of all the things he'd kept bottled up. I wasn't the only one carrying ghosts. We stood there another minute before the real estate lawyer pulled up in that same black car, parking halfway on the sidewalk like he was in a rush. He got out, papers in hand, looking frazzled, tie loose around his neck. "Mr. Hayes," he called, looking from me to my son. "We need to talk." I didn't even flinch. "Go ahead." He came up closer, lowering his voice. "The bank's stepping in. Sales frozen. There's a window to settle things, but it's closing fast. If you've got the funds to clear the debts—" He didn't have to finish that sentence. I already knew what he meant. That check from Martha, sitting in my jacket pocket, folded neat as if she'd put it there herself. $72,500. Enough to clear the house, pay off what needed paying, maybe even set things right. I could feel it right there against my chest, a quiet weight reminding me that even from beyond the grave, Martha was still looking out for me, for all of us. I didn't answer right away, just looked from the lawyer back to my son. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, there wasn't that wall between us. No pride, no distance, just two men standing there, both too tired to pretend anymore. Finally, I spoke. "Let's go to the bank." No big speech, no drama. Just 4 words that meant everything. We got in my son's truck, the engine rattling like it always had, and drove down to First Kansas. The same place where just that morning I'd opened that safety deposit box. And as we sat there in the waiting area, both of us quiet, I pulled the check from my pocket, unfolded it slow, and laid it flat on my knee. My son saw the number, eyes widening slightly, but he didn't say a word. When the bank manager called us in, we handled it quick. Signed what needed signing, paid off what needed paying. And when it was all done, when the papers were filed and the foreclosure lifted, my son just sat there staring down at his hands like he didn't know what to do next. I clapped a hand on his shoulder, heavy and solid like the old days. "Don't let it happen again," I said. He nodded once, voice rough as gravel. "I won't." We stepped back out into the afternoon sun together, side by side this time. Not as father and son exactly, not yet. But maybe as two men who'd finally figured out how to stand on the same piece of ground without knocking each other down. And as we stood there, watching the cars pass by on Main Street, I realized something else. This wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. There was still one more thing I needed to do. One last thing Martha would have wanted me to take care of before I could really call it finished. But that would have to wait until tomorrow. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Old habit. Back when I was still driving long haul, I'd always rise before dawn, coffee in hand, engine warming up before most folks even opened their eyes. But this morning felt different, like my body knew there was still unfinished business. The house wasn't lost anymore. My son had stayed the night at the motel, in the room next to mine. We hadn't talked much after leaving the bank. Sometimes silence between men says more than words, but I could tell in the way he shook my hand before heading to his room that things had shifted. Something had finally settled between us. But there was one more thing. That key. Martha's key. I couldn't shake it. After we'd paid off the house, after clearing everything, I kept that locket she left me close. But that key, it felt like there was still a door waiting somewhere. So I walked down to the house again. This time, there was no moving truck, no real estate lawyer, no in-laws sitting in my chair. Just quiet. The porch was empty. The air smelled like early fall, dry leaves, the edge of winter hiding behind the breeze. I let myself up the steps, hand running along the old wood railing I'd sanded down a dozen times over the years. Then I reached into my pocket, pulled out that brass key, and stood there looking at it like it held all the answers. The garage. That's what Martha meant. I stepped off the porch, walked around back, boots crunching against the gravel. The garage door was still there. Same old handle, same rusted lock from way back. I'd left it alone for years. Never needed to use it after I retired. But I slipped that brass key into the lock, turned it, and felt the latch give way like it had just been waiting for me. Inside. There wasn't much. Just old tools, dusty shelves, and in the corner, a wooden box, not big, not flashy, about the size of a footlocker. I knelt down, brushed the dust off, opened it. Inside were things I hadn't seen in years, Martha's keepsakes, things she'd hidden away, letters, photos, and right at the bottom, another envelope, with my name on it, Walter. I opened it, my hands steady now, and her voice was there again, written out like she was standing right beside me. If you found this, then you listened. You let go of the house. You found your peace. That's all I ever wanted for you. That was it. No money this time, no secret. Just a message from the woman I'd loved more than anything in this world. And standing there in that old garage, sunlight slanting through the dusty windows, I realized something. It was never about the house, never about money. It was about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. Later that afternoon, I met my son back at the diner, sat at our booth. We didn't talk about the house. We didn't talk about the garage. We just sat there like two men sharing coffee again for the first time in years. And that was enough. If you've made it this far, I want to say something personal. If you've made it this far, I truly thank you for listening to me. And I'd also like to thank the Grandpa Tales channel for giving me the opportunity to share my story. If you want to help this channel, make sure to subscribe and share this video, because every day there's a new story here. And who knows, maybe one of them feels just like yours too.